Evelyn, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to give a bit of context and a keynote introduction to this project. Thank you for the CASCADE Project for organizing and having delivered such productive and enriching products and work over the last 2.5 years. Thank you, the European Union, for supporting this project in the first place. And I'm also delighted to follow colleagues such as Jari from Finland, and to be here on the call and as part of this group with long-standing friends and colleagues from MSB, CBSS, and other organizations. So delighted to be here this morning. I'll share my slides, if you don't mind, so I can support a little bit what I'm saying with some elements of visuals. I hope you can see. Why is it not working? Oh, here it goes. You should be able to see the slides. Evelyn, I can see your face. So if you can nod positively if you see the slides, perfect. Super, fantastic. So
I'm on slide mode, or what do you call them?
I'm on slide mode, yes.
Slideshow mode. It's not.
Let me see
Yes.
then. Swap, I should do this, right? Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, super. So I'll start with a quick word of introduction. My name's Andrew Bauer. I'm a Program Management Officer at the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, a regional office for Europe and Central Asia. The office I work for is the custodian agency at the UN for the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. We got a very contextualized introduction here by Jari presenting how this applies in Finland, so I will not here detail the elements of the Sendai framework, but simply to recall the importance and the relevance of this project, as it really reflects the fact that Sendai implementation can only be successful if all levels of governance, all stakeholders in all sectors are involved in preventing new risk, reducing existing risk, and driving resilience as a governance issue, as a knowledge, a risk knowledge dimension, but also importantly, as the representative of the city of Turku said, talking about that financing and investment component, one of the 4 priorities of the Sendai framework, which is at a very timely phase now as we reach 2021 and the new decade towards 2030, having implemented the 6th target of the Sendai framework, target E, on the development of strategies. Now it is about implementing strategies and working out how best to finance and orient investments to ensure that we can implement successfully strategies for DRR at local, national, as well as regional dimensions. And here I'd like to also again echo and underline the great work CBSS has been driving in this respect in the Baltic Sea region. The Sendai framework also has a very important 4th priority around disaster preparedness, and we've seen over the last few months how important it is to address complex systemic risk from a perspective also of ensuring preparedness. And the rescue services and operational colleagues on the line today will recognize how important it is to bring together those elements. Response is critical, but response will only go as far as the prevention and preparedness measures taken will provide the right context to reduce those risks and vulnerabilities to ensure that the future impacts are less stressful on the systems they affect. A quick word of context, and I saw from the Menti poll, and that Evelyn was very useful to understand a little bit the audience here. We really have a strong climate change adaptation community and audience today, but also a strong audience covering and of expert and engaged in both dimensions. And of course, across all levels, working at all levels. And I will not detail here this notion of coherence between 2 critically connected agendas, but I would like to share with you a few elements of context that I think can give an idea of some of the areas where this notion of coherence needs to be looked at carefully, and a number of those components are being addressed by the CASCADE project, and we will welcome the opportunities to build on those results as the project comes to an end. But of course, the project comes to an end, but the products of those projects and the good dynamics and cooperation that have emerged will, of course, continue beyond this project cycle. Disaster risk reduction and climate adaptations are really two sides of the same coin. Whether you're looking at the assessment and analysis of risk, climate risk in the Sendai framework's perspective, an all hazards approach is being looked at very carefully and closely. And of course, vulnerability assessments are really at the heart of developing adaptation plans, whether at national or local level, and informing future investments and decision making towards adaptation to climate extremes, as well as to every other form of disaster. And as we're seeing here in the context of COVID, we are in a context where risks are no longer siloed. Risks are complex, they are interconnected, and they need to be addressed in an all hazards approach, bringing together, as Jari very strongly demonstrated with his network, the importance of bringing those various sectors together, those various levels of governance together to address a better understanding of those risks. But of course, as the network that Jari introduced for Finland demonstrates, this works if the governance structures, if the legal frameworks are in place to have that capability to engage on both disaster risk reduction as well as climate change adaptation, which are cross-cutting and comprehensive agendas that are not limited to one sectoral dimension. So we really are at the UN encouraging rescue, civil protection and rescue operatives to really look at the climate agenda as a central component of their work, and vice versa, to understand how in other sectors might it be the climate agenda, the climate community, as well as the health community, as we're seeing with COVID-19, the importance of connecting closely with the civil protection authorities, which traditionally have been closely tied to the disaster risk reduction agenda. The question of finance is becoming critically important. I'm very happy that Jari mentioned the European Forum taking place in November this year, and we're delighted to see your active engagement, and we look forward to seeing as many of you there involved in these conversations. But one of the pillar conversations to take place there in driving the agenda forward for the next 10 years will be, how do we address the question of disaster and climate finance? How do we finance implementation of what we're doing? How do we de-risk investments? How do we inform better risk-informed investments going forward? And I think these will be critical conversations from here onwards. And I think a lot of what is being done in the context of this project will contribute enormously to this process. And finally, there are some issues which naturally bring together those two communities. Nature-based solutions, as an example, where intrinsically nature-based solutions is an adaptation measure as well as a disaster risk reduction measure, and they cannot really be distinguished from one another in this context. So we really are talking about a context where it may have two communities, it may have two sets of legislative frameworks, yet some issues really bring those two agendas together around certain key elements, and nature-based solutions is definitely one of them. And of course, in the whole process of monitoring and reporting, and Jari again mentioned from the case of Finland, the efforts done at national level to report against the international frameworks. The Ministry of Interior in Finland is in charge of the Sendai framework. There will be a reporting also in place for the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as to a lesser extent vis-a-vis the Paris Agreement and the around the climate agenda. But how do we then ensure coherence between those reporting efforts? This is also an exercise that at a UN level, in our engagement with national authorities, we try to understand how better to connect those elements to create some coherence in this process. But of course, data is really at the heart here, and how do we turn data into a meaningful message will be an exercise that contributes directly to both agendas. But again, I will not give full credit to the importance of the coherence here with just a slide in a few minutes, but I think it's important to present a few hooks that may influence a little bit the conversations today, and maybe the orientations that the results of the CASCADE projects may want to take going forward. And one important component in this process is looking at regional cooperation. And I took one here, which from the UNDRR perspective is close to our hearts and our engagement, which is the work with the Union Civil Protection Mechanism in the EU context. In this respect, there are some very strong synergies between existing frameworks, in this case, a binding regional framework at an EU level that works with 27, if not actually 33 countries, with some binding requirements around risk assessments, around capabilities for disaster risk and management planning. This is purely around prevention here. And here we really see the correlations with the key priorities of the Sendai framework. So in effect, regional cooperation is driving Sendai implementation at a national level as well as at a local level. Union Civil Protection Mechanism is by definition and competence something that is very much at the involving coordination support role of national authorities, but you will have, and I understand a colleague from the European Commission will speak about the climate change adaptation strategy later this morning. And in this context, we really see some close correlations in the context of an EU dynamic, where we see those components at a local level really emerge here in the sense of building resilience in the local context. But how do you address that correlation, that link between the national, the local, but also therefore the regional, the national and the local? And again, I cannot give enough credit to CBSS for a lot of the work being done here to really try and create that regional dynamic in bringing together and convening the member states of the CBSS environment to discuss not only regional but also national as well as local priorities in driving implementation of the Sendai framework and ultimately contributing to other forms of collaboration in place, such as the EU context. I would simply like to touch upon a few elements that were brought to my attention in terms of what CASCADE Project has been contributing over the last 2.5 years. And really emphasizing how important it is that such projects can provide some elements around improving knowledge around the assessment of climate change related risks at a community level. We understand that experiences at community level are unique and they are very context specific, but providing some form of discussion and exchange of experiences and developing toolboxes. And I look forward to hearing a little bit more about that later. How this proceeds is critically important, I think, and it will be very good to see how the project is able to sustain the use and activity of these instruments and tools produced outside and beyond the life cycle of the project. Key important elements, of course, is increasing capacity of human resources, and this CASCADE project has been very central in this respect. And as I said, that sharing of experiences, and I'll go back afterwards to a possible solution to help sustain some of the results that community level engagement has triggered in this project. Around this notion of learning, a peer learning exchange, and of course dialogue meetings about implementation, about sharing of experiences, and ultimately producing some policy recommendations that we will be very happy to help disseminate as the project tries to influence the processes before and as part of its final stages. So I was talking about a possible element of an answer to how could one help sustain some of the results of existing projects or some of the engagement that some of the cities here, despite sometimes limited resources to engage, have taken the time to invest in terms of improving capacities for resilience, both to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. The UN has launched a Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative, which is a natural following initiative to the Making Cities Resilient campaign that many of you may be aware of. And I know that here today are so long-standing partners of this previous campaign, and we're very happy to see already some of you involved in the new initiative, taking it forward. MCR 2030 is really there to accompany cities as part of a global network around a resilience roadmap. So identifying opportunities for cities to either improve understanding of disaster risk at a local level, to either improve planning of strategies and plans for resilience at a local level again, engaged with a set of partners, other cities, as well as national authorities to accompany this process. And finally, as I was saying earlier, this important component of how do we address the notion of implementation? And the representative of Turku mentioned this earlier. How do we ensure that financing and investments is addressed going forward? And I think as terms of next steps for this project, looking really at that implementation component of both adaptation plans as well as DRR strategies will be critical in this respect. And resilience building through peer learning is really at the heart of this initiative. The network has been created to create a trusted environment where practitioners on resilience, again here I'm not talking about DRR only, but resilience in its broadest sense. So climate adaptation, DRR in its traditional sense, but also other forms of resilience activities that may be taking place at a local level will be at the heart of those exchanges between cities. It is really there also to construct on a set of partners that have been driving this process of supporting cities engage with each other. We have at a regional level a coordinating committee, and we're very glad, for example, MSB is strongly involved. We would like to see how CBSS could be involved with us in this process, and really work in this respect with partners who can accompany the cities in steering the strategic orientations of this initiative. And of course, through that process, identifying those tools and instruments, such as products that the CASCADE project could present, that offer a broad offer to cities that wish to join this network and benefit from the various tools and instruments out there. And all this in the spirit of increasing this notion of twinning, of peer learning between cities to provide support in the various expertise areas looked for. And finally, one important component here is this notion that cities that are really at the driving edge of this whole process would be looking to also establish themselves as a bit of a hub for resilience. And we would like to also work with leading cities in the region and in the global network to become resilience hubs in this context. So it builds on the previous role model cities of the Making Cities Resilient campaign. It really is around some political and technical commitments that cities can make to address disaster and climate risks. And these would be cities that can really help other cities as part of the network drive their plans and risk governance for resilience, and sharing experiences and really becoming champions and inspirations across the network. And these were cities could be at the heart of city-to-city collaboration and support. So all these elements are opportunities for cities such as those engaged in the network to build on the expertise and the dynamics that have really driven the CASCADE project to see, could we be interested in joining such a network to engage in the roadmap? Could we be interested to also explore opportunities? Are we interested to become possibly a hub for resilience? And then therefore, this network would be the place to come and engage on these questions. And we'd be delighted to have you with us and on board. And of course, this comes as a network offering a certain set of exposure and availability of support instruments that UNDRR, as well as the core partners, are promoting and offering as part of their respective track of works. So here are just very practical examples of type of work UNDRR is doing, where we are supporting cities directly, but many other partners have their own contributions, some of them very dedicated to the climate adaptation environment, for example, and we would really welcome those conversations to take place with cities who have worked on the CASCADE project to see what may be the needs following the project. And finally, just connecting again the MCR 2030 initiative with the CASCADE project, really, I think this is the space where, going back to the point made by the representatives of Turku and Finland earlier, this idea that there is a need to continue with and share the work on resilience building that has been started by this project. And I would really emphasize this value of not stopping at the end of the project cycle and really seeing how you could explore also with the donor organization how to engage on life after the project cycle, and on sharing those experiences, engaging in the relevant network, and engaging with partners that may be able to help construct some of their work, benefiting from the work that the CASCADE project has created, to really engage in networks such as MCR 2030. And finally, last but not least, I really think this project is a signal how much work in the Baltic Sea region has been done towards reinforcing regional cooperation around local resilience, and actually around resilience in general terms. In this context, I would really encourage CBSS and others to really explore how can we continue driving this regional cooperation around local resilience. And UNDRR would be delighted to continue those conversations going forward to really establish and consolidate the presence of these hubs or these central points in a regional context that are really galvanizing a political and technical momentum towards resilience building at a local level. And finally, just with a little word of visual promotion, if you were interested in joining the network, and we really hope to see you there soon, is go online at mcr2030.undrr.org and register your city as a member of this initiative. And we'll be delighted to have you there and offering a bit of a natural transition towards the next steps that the CASCADE project has set in motion. With this, Evelyn, I'll stop here. I'll thank you again for inviting us, and be very happy to exchange with colleagues here. I will have to leave a little bit before 11 o'clock this morning, I'm afraid, but I'll be delighted to be with you for the next few minutes and answer any questions there may be. So thank you very much again, and over to you.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting and also good to hear that that with this CASCADE project we don't stop here, but there are ways to take this work forward. Very, very good. Yes, we have a question here in the chat. Will the MCR 2030 resilience roadmap process also be working on ensuring coherence between adaptation and disaster risk reduction reporting, or how to tailor the reporting to meet the needs of various macro regions?
It's an interesting question in the fact that it's a timely question, because we are at the starting point of this new initiative in the first 6 months, defining what will be the contributions to implementation here. And one of the elements that really has come out from the key regional partners in the process has been that, yes, there is a need to address that synergy and coherence between DRR and climate change adaptation. And now the process will be to see with the cities member of the network, how can that exactly translate into practice? And I think this goes back to the CASCADE project's results. We're seeing here a set of city-driven activities, products, and momentums that I think can be put to such a network to see how to create some dynamics and some momentum and some concrete options for action around connecting MCR 2030 with the CASCADE project, and therefore building more coherence between two political agendas that would be critical. It will be a demand-driven process. We want to hear from the cities in the network what could be the needs, but indeed it is clearly a message received that the actions and processes for the future should be strongly focused around this coherence element between DRI and climate change adaptation. I do not know who asked the question, but if it is a representative of a local authority, we would be very happy to engage and hear more about some ideas going forward on this. And hopefully have you part of the network soon. So thank you for the question.
I just want to say that this was my colleague Heidi Tuhkanen, who's not in the city as such. She's a researcher, but working on cities and local level resilience.
And equally happy to speak with Heidi also, of course.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think we have to